is aimed at one board member, the complaint, or the request.
And then that one board
And
member.
that one board member just refuses to comply.
Then the complaint would go against the board member.
What-
I asked board member A for all his records pertaining to subject A. Say he's the chair of the curriculum subcommittee and you want all his records. And he or she says no, then you'd have to file a complaint against them. Remember, folks,
who
we are
would
not the
file it?
FOI FBI.
Would we file the
You
complaint
could if you
against
wanted.
it? Or we would just reply to the requester that we have done our due diligence over months of requesting, and this one member is refusing to turn over
How you
information?
guys got along?
How do you define get along? You guys were defining things.
I don't know how your family is, but I have 7 in mine, and it wasn't always smooth.
Believe me, I get it. Look, they're public records. Request is made of, let's take 2 scenarios. Request is made of all 9 board members for records, and one refuses. The person responsible for the record says, look, here's from 8 of us, this one doesn't respond. The board could file a complaint. The board member, board versus board. Remember the Mad Magazine, Spy versus Spy, that kind of thing? You could do that. Or the person making the request could file a complaint. If the request was made of one board individual and that board member declined or refused, then the complaint would clearly go against that person. But who could make the complaint? Whoever asked for the records and didn't get them.
But what is the potential outcome against the person who just refuses?
The Freedom of Information Commission has a couple of sort of powerful tools. One, we talked about the null and void for that emergency meeting. The other is it can levy a civil penalty against an individual of anywhere from $20 to $1,000. And it goes against the individual, not against the board. Now, the scenario that you guys are talking about one board member refusing and just saying no, to FOI, then clearly that's a situation where the board would consider very seriously a civil penalty.
So the board should.
Our board, I'm sorry, our commission.
Right.
Our commission would say, you know what, look, this is nuts. He should know their public records, or she should know their public records. We're ordering a civil penalty of $1,000 against this individual.
But the board should file the complaint.
The board
to
can.
kind of protect the rest of the board members.
Should is a little strong for me. Could would be what but usually the complaint comes from the requester. But let's suppose you're having a battle, and you ask that board member for records. You as the board chair ask the board, and you refuse. Then clearly you would file a complaint.
Right, but it's an outside source, I don't know, hypothetically say a newspaper.
Yeah.
And they request that information, and they request of the
Complaint.
board and that individual, but that individual refuses to give
Then the
it.
complaint should go. Were I writing that complaint in my former life, I would write it against the one board member because the others have complied.
Okay, thank you.
And that one board member would be the person who would be responsible. Okay.
Was this meeting tonight required of all the board members?
It was, we
I mean, your
can't,
committee,
we can't require, the honest answer is, I'm glad so many people are here, but we can't require attendance. We can only schedule it and say, we're coming, this is part of the settlement of a complaint that was filed, and encourage as many of you as possible to come. We can't require attendance.
Right, the reply was for the full board to
Right.
attend an FOI training.
Right,
Which was scheduled for
right. But we can't,
yet you're saying that if a board member, specific board member, violated the document concept,
right.
that you would file, the commission would just hold that one
No,
individual?
only, it depends on how the complaint is filed. If the complaint is filed against the individual, then the commission would hold that one individual responsible. If the complaint's filed against the whole board, then the commission would have to deal with it in a different light. Okay? I want to talk, this is, the next part of the conversation can go on for hours, and I'm not going to do that. But I want to give you a brief idea of how the 3 E's work: exceptions, exclusions, exemptions. We've already talked about exceptions when we've talked about FERPA. Except as otherwise provided by any federal law or state statute, the record goes out. FERPA is a federal law that says, we talked about it, you don't give out records that identify kids if you're an educational institution. agency. So that would override anything that's in the FOI Act. So when you're given a records request for, you know, student records, you'd probably have to redact them heavily or not give them out at all, because you would identify the student and you wouldn't be able to do it. It's important that you know what federal and state laws pertain to the records that you have, educational records. The tricky part about this E is that they're not in the FOI Act. They're scattered all over the place. FERPA is not in the FOI Act. Different exceptions are not in the FOI, so you need to look at the records that pertain to educational records, administrative, things like that, so that you have an idea, because you could call me and ask me and I wouldn't know. This group will appreciate this little story. I told you I've been with FOI for almost 14 years. To be in a position to come out and speak to people, to answer questions on the phone, to answer emails, they had to train me. Even though as a journalist I knew everything, they still had to train me, right? So they finally say, you're ready to go. You've got the phones. This is a true story. The very first week I'm answering these calls, a woman calls up and says, I would like to see my child's teacher's evaluation. Now, I said, this is pre-Board of Ed days for me, so I'm looking, and I go frontwards and backwards through the FOI Act. I can't find a single word about a teacher evaluation. I said, I think you can have it. Unfortunately, somebody was listening. What's the matter? Now seared into my brain is the fact that section 10-151C says that you can't give out a teacher evaluation in a public school, but I didn't know that. And I had covered education, for crying out loud. I was an editor in a newspaper, and I didn't know it because it's not in the Act. I've been married to a teacher for 31 years. I can't see her evaluation, and I didn't know it, you know? But that, I mean, these are things that you need to know, and you can't know by reading the law. These different exceptions are out there. We hit on two of the big ones for you folks, but there may be others, and you want to deal with them. Exclusions. Probably not a big problem for you guys. Are any board members judges or correction officers or police officers? There's an exclusion for the addresses of about 12 categories of working folks. Judges, correction officers, police officers, firefighters. And it says that you don't give out their home addresses. So let's suppose you had a judge on your board and someone that wanted a roster. You know, my address was okay, but if I had a judge sitting next to me, his home address would come off before we gave out the roster. It's a pretty simple way to go over that. The exemptions, the last of the 3 E's. They are in the FOI Act. There's section 1-210. There's 27 of them, and we have talked about a couple of them, so we're not cutting it as short as we might have. We talked about the exemption for drafts. That's in there. We talked about the exemption for records that, if released, would be a security problem. I want you to look at 210B19 if you've got a situation like that. It tells you, you look at it, okay, we think there's a security risk here giving this record out. We're going to contact DESPI or state police. They will tell us whether we're right or not. And if someone files a complaint, and then you respond to the request, no, the police and us think it shouldn't be given out, and then you make judgment accordingly. And if the complaint is filed, they come with you to defend the decision not to release.
That's 1015B19?
That's 1-210B19. 210B19.
Thank you.
We talked about contract negotiations. There's an exemption for records that are created as part of ongoing collective bargaining. So, you know, the exchanges that you make with contract proposals and language proposals and things like that, there's an exemption for those. You're involved in a lawsuit. Strategy and negotiations with respect to pending claims or pending litigation, the documents that are created as part of the lawsuit, not leading up to the lawsuit, but as part of the lawsuit, there's an exemption for those. There's an exemption in the FOI Act for records that are, and we touched on this briefly too, that for records that are in personnel or medical or similar files, the disclosure of which would constitute an invasion of personal privacy. Now, if you come from the private sector to the public sector, you think, it's in my personnel file, it's not going to go out. Surprise, personnel files are public records too. But it's supposed to happen, bless you, should somebody ask for something in your personnel file, The HR person is supposed to look at it and say, would releasing this be an invasion of his privacy? If the personnel person believes that it is, then and only then notifies you and says, I think it's an invasion of privacy. And then you get to say, I don't think it is, go ahead, and out it goes. Or you say, you're absolutely right, don't give it out. And if that determination is made, the record cannot be released until or unless the person making the request files a complaint with the FOI Commission, and the FOI Commission says, you're wrong, no invasion of privacy, give it out.
So I sometimes get FOI requests if we have, I don't know, an example would be, let's say we have a non-certified employee and the district has taken disciplinary action, there's written reprimands, et cetera, et cetera. Where would that fall?
Okay. How do you determine invasion of privacy is the
Right.
question.
Correct.
The standard comes from a 1993 state Supreme Court case. It is called the Perkins decision.
Oh, yes, okay, so that's the violation of the public sensibilities and all that, right?
That
Yeah.
involved a teacher, oddly enough, who objected to the release of her attendance records. The state Supreme Court told us that the attendance records of all of us who work in the public sector are public, period, end of story, out they go. And then it said to have been an invasion of this woman's privacy, the release of those records would have to have been both, not either or, highly offensive and not a matter of public concern. So the HR person, in your case you, who makes the
Yep.
decision, is it both of those, not either or? And folks, that gets hard too because it's offensive, not embarrassing. You know, a disciplinary thing against somebody may be embarrassing, but it may not, it's maybe something that the public has the right to know.
Sure.
So, quick example, City of Middletown, situation with a police officer. There were rumors going all over town that things going on in his home were not cool. In fact, the rumors got so strong that the police department said, he's having trouble at home and it may be affecting, so they put him on desk duty, they took him off the street, and they did a complete and thorough internal affairs investigation. They wrote an IA report, which basically said, you know what, we did a complete, thorough, and yeah, he's having a lot of trouble at home, but it's not affecting his job. He's doing a terrific job as a police officer. They put him back on the street. The Hartford Courant wants to see the report. Middletown PD says, I don't think so. We think it would be offensive to tell the world what's going on in this guy's home. So they say no. The Courant comes to the FOI Commission with a complaint, as is its right. They believe they've been denied improperly, and says, we want to see it. So our commission looks at this report in camera, behind closed doors, which is what we do when a record is in dispute. It looks at it and says, there's an awful lot about this guy's personal troubles at home. And it also says he's doing a great job as a cop. There's no connection, it's a complete disconnect. It would be highly offensive to tell the world what's going on in his home, and it's nobody's business. It's not a matter of public concern because he's doing a great job. Complaint dismissed, the report wasn't released. But it's important that it meets both prongs of the test. Okay, and it's a judgment thing. Many agencies get into trouble this way. Oh, request for personnel file, it's in your personnel file, what do you think? And once you do that, you've given them the right to object, and then you look at it and say, there's nothing bad in here, and the complaint comes in and it's against you, it's not against the person whose record it is.
But what if Joe released the information about
Right.
this person with all the, now all of us board members see all the write-ups and everything in
Mhm.
the newspaper. How do we then hear a grievance because we can't be impartial because we've read everything
Okay,
in the newspaper?
that's beyond FOI, but if it's a personnel record that's not exempt, it should be released. I can't answer that question for you, it's probably best directed to your labor attorney, but if it's a record that's not exempt, it's gotta go out. It's gotta be released. And it's gotta meet, to be exempt, it's gotta meet both prongs of that test. Okay. I'm looking at the clock, I'm gonna stop, I could do more. Are there any records that we haven't talked about that you wanna ask about? Okay, we've been here even more than an hour and a half, very impressive, everybody's still awake, congratulations.
It was riveting.
You now know everything there is to know about freedom of information. You're all set. tomorrow morning somebody walks in and asks you for a record, you say, no, Tom says we don't have to give it out, and you don't give it out. Remember that
And when they call Tom.
then they file a complaint. Remember that the complaint doesn't mean that you're wrong. It doesn't mean that you're bad. It means that you've made a judgment based on what you know about interpreting this law. The process is then, the complaint is filed, we review it. We make sure we have jurisdiction. If we have jurisdiction, we open it up, we put a number on it. We call that docketing the complaint. We then assign a mediator. In this case that we're dealing with, that was me. And your attorney and I got together and we figured out a way so that you didn't have the complaints dismissed, and I mean the complaint is withdrawn and it's gone. You don't have to go to a hearing, no judgment. But let's suppose that mediation doesn't work. Remember that when you go to a hearing before the FOI Commission, you technically don't need an attorney. You can bring one if you want, most boards do, but you don't have to. If it's a simple matter and you want to defend yourself and save the legal fees, you can do that. You tell your side, they tell their side, the hearing officer gathers all the information and makes a decision. Then it goes to the commission votes it up or down, and that's what you're supposed to do. But again, you can always appeal it up to the state Supreme Court. Think openness, think accessibility. Remember that these are public records, you're public servants, you'll be fine. And the other thing, if you have questions, if you have issues, you now have a face to put with the voice on the other end of the phone. Do not ever hesitate to call. No question is stupid, and if I don't know the answer, I'm never afraid to say I don't know. But I'll give you an answer. At least you're able to base your decision on something that is relevant to what the FOI Commission says.
Okay. Do you have some cards?
I have what I call the Freedom of Information American Express card. Don't leave home without it. These are highlights of the FOI Act. But as important, folks, on the back, our name, our address, our phone number. You call up, you ask for Tom. Our website's on the back there. That can also be helpful. Gee, have they ever had a case like this? Have they ever had a decision on something like this? And you might be able to help yourself. The other thing that I also brought that you might find helpful, I call this the meeting cheat sheet. It is a grid that talks to you about when to notice, how to notice, when the minutes are due, and stuff like that. This can be really helpful too, so you can pass those around as well. Yes, sir.
Let's go to the penalty phase of the commission.
Yeah.
And where does the penalty, what actual powers do you have to actually inflict pain and punishment?
Well, it's not pain and punishment. For the most part, we tend to tell you you were wrong, do it right next time.
Okay.
But I told you about the civil penalties,
Okay, it's $1,000.
and I told you about declaring null and void something that happens at an improper meeting. Those are the two strongest ones. So you would come before the commission. The scenario that was described here a little while ago, I found particularly troubling. The board member just saying no. That board member, I would argue, is susceptible to a very large fine. And the fine would be addressed to the board member.
Large fine by who?
$1,000 by the FOI Commission. We have the power
I'm
to,
not coming and here's the check for $1,000 and.
well, if that's what you choose to do, but then you do it again and
But I mean,
again, the fines are still coming.
But I'm just saying, do you have other remedies?
No.
So you're really just limited to a slap on the wrist and $1,000?
I don't think $1,000 is a slap on the wrist, but maybe you got a lot of money, I don't know.
Well, it all depends just what your priorities are.
Okay. Your priority should be open government. Your priority should be open and accessible government. That's what the priority is. That's the only way democracy works.
I think we need an over-reporting version of this.
Oh, yeah, by the way, small agency, apologize for the small print. Any other questions, anything else? Okay, I'm going home.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Very much.
Hang on, Andrew, we gotta finish. Any items for the good of the order?
Not me.
Anyone? Motion to adjourn?
Move we adjourn.
Bill, second. Andrew, in favor? Okay, have a good night.
All right.